if you feel like you have to be the perfect leader, and again, to your point, if you're telling yourself that story, show up late to a meeting. Where if you're always the first person there and you're standing behind the desk and waiting for everybody else, be the last person or show up a little late.
Mhm.
That will invoke the conversation.
Welcome to this week's episode of Leadership Soundbites with my very special guest and friend, Kristi Beaufore, Senior Director of Integration at Sutter Health. And we were just chatting before I hit record. In fact, we were probably chatting after I hit record, but I'll splice that section off. Or after I hit it. Is the integration is like where the action happens. And if you're looking at, we can have plans all day long, but what does it look like to actually, when I think of integration, I think about when you're baking a recipe, folding in the ingredients, right? That's what it feels like. That's what it feels like. So welcome. The topic that we chose, and thank you for jumping on, because I've been listening to the book Never Lead Alone by Keith Ferrazzi. And it's funny, I laugh because I think read, but read to me is listen to, as I'm walking around. And there's sections in this book that reminded me of you, Kristi, when we were doing, I was helping support your team remotely with process improvement. I think one of my team members, Huey, was the main one that was supporting you. But I remember the report outs, and you would do this check-in at the beginning of it with the team personally. And that's what kicked this whole thing off. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. Because I'm like, oh my God, Kristi, you do this stuff that he's talking about in the book. I love it. So the quote we're kicking off with is vulnerability builds trust and creates the safety teams need to thrive. So I'm curious from your perspective, and I know we've talked offline about what this is. What does that mean for you, and what's been your experience about that as a leader, creating that space, or your role?
It's perfect timing. Interesting. We were talking about this just a couple of days ago in a leadership group, and one of the leaders brought up in the past, it was you had to show up as somebody who as a leader, had no problems, no issues. You were perfect and you never made a mistake. And we know how that turns out. And now in leadership, it's about sharing parts of yourself so people understand that you are real, that you do have issues, that you do need help, and you aren't perfect. And that's that vulnerability. And how can you bring that to the team? It's not about saying, that the worst parts of yourself and spilling your guts. And it's about saying, I was late today because my son's, struggling at school, and I wanted to go in and make sure everything was okay. And it's okay to say that, because people want to say, oh my gosh, I experienced that too, and here's what I did. And you're starting then to create this part of this team where you're building your trust.
It's interesting because it is about exposing that kind of stuff. And to your point, we had Teresa Fry on the podcast after she had retired from Sutter Health. And one of the things she talked about, and it was during COVID, and I think this is when leaders started to realize, and that shift took place. Okay, I'm also at home. If you have a family and the kids are at the dining room table with you, or you're functioning out of, how many leaders did we see that background on early Zoom stuff was their bedroom or maybe a guest room, right? And so you've got senior leaders of the organization that's their background. And so I think that's when we started realizing, okay, there is a chink in the armor, and it's okay that there's a chink in the armor. But like Teresa said, when COVID hit, she said, I went there and I was vulnerable and very transparent with the team. And I'll give some caveats in the other part of it, is that I don't know, Teresa, don't know what the answers are. I don't know what it is that we're going to navigate through this, but I do know with confidence that we have every leader in the room that we're going to figure that out. So that to me is like this combo of vulnerability, but it's not to this point of the sky is falling, we're never going to make it out of here alive.
Yep. And Teresa, it's funny that you say that. Teresa was one of the first that actually took the blur off or moved, away from the white wall. We also did the white wall and
Yeah.
was showing her house. And one of the first people that brought in her puppy when she got a puppy. And it was like, you are human. And I think that was important to her. And she understood the importance of that in that moment because people were panicking. It
Mm-hmm.
was, what are we going to do? How are we going to get through this? How are we going to be able to meet the needs of our patients in this time? And that brought a calm that, kept everybody focused. And so there's something to be said about bringing in those parts of yourself to the team,
Mm-hmm.
so everybody can see that we're all in this together, that
Mm-hmm.
we're all human, and I'm just not a perfect, have all the answers behind a white wall type of a thing.
Well, and I think what happens too, and I don't think as I know because I've talked to people, is that, and it's almost like the whole persona that you have on social media is that people are on the outside looking in, and what typically people don't see in leadership is that question mark that I'm not really sure that someone else is going and soundboarding with somebody else, because I have plenty of senior leaders that and Trina White called it soundboarding. She was the first one I was with that called it soundboarding. And it's like somebody that you can bounce stuff off of, to be able to get the thinking clear and also challenge your own thinking. And part of the own thinking that needs to be challenged with leaders that's super important is for you as a leader to believe, and you said it earlier, I have to have all the answers. Who sold you that bill of goods? And I think what happened is we sell it to ourselves because we're looking at the outside in to somebody else, and that's what we're telling ourselves a story. They have all the answers. No, they don't.
No, and I think one of the things that Keith Ferrazzi says really well, and I watched his podcast, is understanding the importance of the front line and the fact that that's where the work is done. So they
Mm-hmm.
understand what's going on. And you as a leader coming down to the front line, coming into the front line and saying, I don't know what you do. I know
Mm-hmm.
that we need to do this thing. This is what I've been given as a goal, but I don't know what you do. And I need you to help me in how we
Mm-hmm.
can achieve this goal is powerful versus walking down there and saying, I need you to start pulling this lever.
Mm-hmm.
And, but you don't know as the leader what they do. And that pulling that lever may mean that everything from that point on is broken.
Mm-hmm. But what happens the old way, and I'm going to say the old way, but it's still the current way in a lot of organizations, leadership styles, is if we don't humble ourselves and as leaders and we don't get curious about what's going on and include other people, um, we end up saying things like that and stuff gets broken and we blame the front line. Or we blame them to go, why didn't you tell me? What's the feedback loop that someone's going to do that? What I appreciate in the book that I'm reading now, the thing that I want to call out is where he did the personal check-in, right? And so to your point with Teresa, with her puppy and all that stuff, Christopher Mack, when I had him on the podcast, I think it was the first time he was talking about during COVID is when things started to release. And so his kids, because he was working from home, they could come in and it was okay. He wasn't mortified. But I remember that transition with people because at first nobody was on camera. All right. Not even leaders. And so I remember coaching leaders to go, it starts with you. So you've got to be comfortable going on camera. And people are like, I don't like to look at myself. And so it's like even now, you and I talking, I'm not looking at me, I'm looking at you. And so we just have to get used to that because we're not used to looking at someone where there's a mirror behind them or a mirror next to them to where we can see ourselves. And after a while, we get programmed doing that. But leaders need to go first to say, this is clunky and awkward, um, and it's okay, to be personal and all that. But Keith Ferrazzi is the thing that reminded me, he had this check-in that he was talking about to where people come, and I don't know if it was in the weekly meeting, whatever it is, but they say where they're at in their energy, whether they're green, yellow, red, personally or professionally, how they're feeling, so that the rest of the team knows how to engage with them and also give them grace. If they're going through a bunch of crap and you're not telling anybody about the crap, but they're experiencing the fallout, they're gonna pass some judgments. but if you give them a heads up about what's going on, which is where the leader's job is to set the expectation, it makes a difference. And I know that's a similar practice that you did with your team when you were at the foundation. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, during our tier check-in, so T3, where it was all the leaders from clinicians to leaders within the care center, directors and above, managers and directors and above. And we started every meeting off with the exact, what are you talking about? Red, yellow, green.
Mm-hmm.
We also tried a kind of a fist of five. So it's almost whatever the mechanism is that makes you and your team feel comfortable. You'll work through that through experiments. But it was about how are you feeling? What was the weekend like? What are you anticipating for the week? What's going on personally that may prevent you, from showing up the way that you want to
Mm-hmm.
show up? And at first, it was everybody's great, everything's great, we're fine, we're
Yeah.
fine.
I'm
And
fine.
it's fine.
Wonderful.
It's free. It's free. But it took a couple of challenges from each other to say, gosh, you're green. However, I heard you were struggling with this. And then people start to talk about it.
Mhm.
And then people start, okay, well, maybe I'm yellow.
Uh-huh.
And the yellow starts to come out. And then what we kind of did was we actually ended up building almost what looks like your gas gauge,
Yeah.
because people felt like it was more like, am I full or I'm empty? And where am I in that?
Okay. Yeah.
And so it just changes as you get farther down the road. But it also then led to being able to discuss openly and transparently about the work that we were all doing. So whenever
Mm-hmm.
those leaders got up to go over their row of the work that they were doing, it became a two-way, three-way, five-way conversation
Mm-hmm.
with everybody jumping in and feeling comfortable, and that person feeling comfortable to receive that information.
Mm-hmm. How long, when you think about it, because you had a newer team and then you had people that, I don't know that rotated in that much, but you had newer leaders that stepped in. Your experience, how long did it take for you start to see the shift and yeah, how long did it take before you started? Because the other question I have is what was the shift?
Yeah,
Like what?
it
Yeah.
takes a while. It's not anything where you're just going to put up that gauge and everybody jump in and it's going to be the best thing. It really started probably in the middle of COVID. And you go back to Huey, and you and I were talking earlier about coaching kata,
Yeah.
and we were using that framework to develop problems that we were focusing on or a direction
Mm-hmm.
that we wanted to go in. And it meant the person that was focusing on that had to get up and be really vulnerable and
Mm-hmm.
take in feedback from the coach and maybe from the team. So it started with that practice, actually. And then as we moved into more specific tiered check-in, we started to add in, even on all the tiers, how is the team feeling? But
Mm-hmm.
as you heard, we went through multiple experiments to
Mm-hmm.
what made people feel comfortable. And that took probably a year
Yeah.
before. But it was COVID. I mean, there are some good things that came out of COVID.
Yeah.
COVID really that, and I think it was because we were feeling disconnected because of
Mm-hmm.
COVID, and then we were craving the connection,
Yeah.
brought ourselves back together. We started talking about how COVID was affecting us, which then ultimately led to how can
Yeah.
we, move this into this new after COVID world.
Yeah. It's interesting because I remember because when COVID hit, I was the director of the improvement team, the team that supported you in that area. And Huey was in there, and I remember him asking, he goes, Michelle, I'm going to go, and he's going to be leading or teaching group and stuff, your team. He goes, do I have to wear a mask? I said, yeah, everyone has to wear masks at that point. He goes, oh, and I said, and it sucks because you're talking, right? With this mask on, that everything heats up. He goes, yeah, it's not comfortable. No, no.
It's not comfortable. And he even said, because there was that point of, are we allowed to be together in
Yeah,
this room? Because you were
yeah.
doing as much as you could not to bring
Oh,
groups of.
yeah,
So we would start in littler groups, and you had to see what was going on the wall from way far away because we were all keeping our distance. So I think that really actually helped in developing what we wanted this to look like long term.
yeah, yeah. That's funny. Remembering back to that, because it was almost 5 years ago now.
Mhm.
In March it'll be 5 years, which
Well,
is
and you still see
crazy.
teams that have not overcome that. And when I hear that teams that are still meeting, virtually versus in person, and these are teams that were in person. Obviously, there are teams that have
Yeah,
to meet virtually just because of where
yeah,
people are, but it got so comfortable to do that virtually that they did not realize the power that you have when you're in person and
yeah,
you see a person's whole body and those cues that you and I have talked about before
yeah,
are missing in a virtual world.
yeah,
People
yeah.
have a hard time coming back from that.
Um, do you coach people on that? Or
I
how would you
do.
approach that? Yeah, how do you approach that?
I
Because I
do
have thoughts.
that. I get that there's a time and a place for virtual. I mean, I say that as I work in a really virtual world just
Yeah,
because of the footprint that I cover.
yeah.
But I will tell you that anytime I can show up in person and visualize what's happening, there's power in that. And I
Hmm.
always tell people you have to gauge when it's appropriate to do virtual. Maybe it's a data dump. So there's just a lot of information and data that you need to share can be done virtually. But when you really need to get into the meat of something, when you really
Hmm.
are looking at a direction that you want to go and how you want to solve for something, you need to be present, you need to
Hmm.
be engaged, and doing that in person is fundamental.
Yeah, it's interesting because you talk about cues. I know from a facilitation perspective, which a lot of leaders facilitate discussions, you miss the subtle nuances. I mean, yeah, you could have everyone on camera.
Mhm.
But when you're in a room, the energy, and I know with me, the energy draws me to certain people to where part of the room is silent or whatever. And when you're in a virtual setting, you're not going to know what part of the room is silent because it's coming from one direction, the speaker. And so you're not going to be able to pick up on that stuff as much as easily. Um, as what you do in the room, and you can see the people looking away or people looking down or just crossed arms, all the stuff that you can't pick up easily, especially when all you're seeing is neck and above or shoulders and above, of what's happening, to be able to check in with people. And Keith Rossi talks about that too, is that the stuff that where you've really got to come together and make some hard decisions on stuff, be in person.
Mhm.
Don't go virtually and think that you're going to successfully navigate that. But there are other organizations, depending on the culture, that they do. One of the examples in the book is the leader from WordPress. It's got like 1,800 people from all countries of the world, that there is no physical location at all. That being said, they do, I think they may bring people on site for different events. So, so that people can see. But I mean, I have people I work with that I've never met in person. It's been 100% virtual.
And
So,
I think what you said is important. It's they bring people in person for the big stuff. So we know that there are companies out there that are almost, completely virtual and
yeah.
some that do hybrid models. But I think the key to that is you have to know when something is important enough to bring
Hmm.
everybody in person. If you're setting your goals for the next year and you really want people to dive in,
Hmm.
people in person.
Yeah.
You're just showing a quarter's results and you want everybody to be, informed,
Informed.
can be virtual.
Yeah.
But and you have to know that because
Yeah.
if goal setting is perfect, if you're setting a goal and I see Michelle is bouncing her leg under the table, just to look away, that's a cue to me to say this isn't landing. We need to
Yeah.
spend time here.
Yeah. Or they're looking down or they're looking away or yeah, whatever it is. It's interesting. I go back to the other point too is have the elephant in the room conversation. Bring it into the room when you're bringing people together. So it's one of those things too. If you know that there's been tension or there's people that have a certain opinion, don't don't just not bring it up. I mean, it's like have the conversation, acknowledge that people have feelings, that they have right to their feelings. But a lot of times what happens is as humans, we have these feelings, but we also blame someone for the feelings.
Mhm.
So that's the part that we have to. And I go back to Kaizen events. Kaizen events are like that too. You bring cross-functional teams together. They've as a result of the work, right? Because it's being hard on the process, not on the people. But as a result of the process and the work, they've caused each other pain inadvertently over whatever period of time, fill in the blank. And it could be decades, by the way. Okay. So bring the people together, acknowledge what they may be feeling or experiencing, and then also let them know it's not because so and so came to work every day intending to make your life miserable. Because odds are, if whatever process is making you miserable, they're miserable too. So have that conversation, let it out, laugh about it. Another practice I love to do is capture your fears and expectations. So that at the front end of it, you're front loading all this stuff, and you have people sitting there crossing their arms, going, "I don't even want to be here. I don't even know why this isn't going to work. It never worked
Mhm.
before."
Mhm.
Bring it out in the open, and then we can have a conversation. I watch people come closer together, and be able to view stuff.
Absolutely. I love the fears and expectation. And the other piece, I think, when you're in person that you don't get to say, which I love, and I know that there's a million memes out about this, which is let's take that offline.
Oh yes.
If I had a dime for every, probably a nickel for every time you hear let's take that offline from somebody, it's because they do not, they feel, I think you feel like when you're in a virtual that you're pressed for time and you have to move through the meeting. So you
Yes.
don't give somebody the due focus that it requires. And you can't say all of the time, let's take it offline, because that's where people stop talking and they
Mm-hmm.
stop bringing up how they feel because, you've just said that's not important right now. We're going to
Yeah.
talk about it later. And they
Yeah.
said, you're probably never going to circle back with me about that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting because part of it is there's legitimate stuff that you want to take offline. So,
For
for
sure.
instance, if there's agenda topics or whatever that you're going to get through, and people are bringing up this completely unrelated thing, right, about this whatever, yeah, take it offline. Another,
Yeah.
is can we parking lot that right now? Can we loop back? Whatever. The thing with Keith Ferrazzi that I loved in the book that stood out, and I'm going to circle back because it's around this whole personal getting to know people, making connections. Because the thing he called out, and it's absolutely true, is that when we were all at brick and mortar, or the majority of us, and when you heard someone was able to work from home, you're like, what? Now it's like, what do you mean you have to go to the office?
Right.
Totally flipped around. It's kind of like during COVID when, everyone was wearing masks in healthcare and everywhere. And before that, the only people that wore masks in healthcare for the most part were the ones who opted not to get the flu vaccine that year. It was like a requirement. It's like, oh, you have to wear the mask. Yeah. But anyway, it's about building those intentional connections because people are not, they would make them like because water cooler and I got stuff in common, whatever. But as leaders, we need to be intentional about connecting our entire team. It doesn't mean everyone's a buddy, but it means that there's a personal connection there. I love what he called out, and I think I shared this with you offline, is the intimate dinners, like once a quarter. So this is for a leadership team, right? That because there is a cost involved in doing that. And what he talked about was once a quarter you get together, and it's not about talking about business, it's about taking the relationship deeper. So it is with your leadership team, one question, and he had a list of several. And like I told you, I'm going to go and I actually have the physical book, so I'm going to go highlight where these things are because I want these questions. But one of them was that what event in your life significantly impacted your career or you? So, and what you do is you just have that one question. So it's not like you're riddling people with 3 to 5 questions. And everyone in the team takes the time to answer that question. Um, and start with somebody who's more comfortable with it, who's gonna, go along and be vulnerable, but not to the gooey, messy part, because they're going to be role modeling what this looks like. But people then start making connections with other people. And it's the same thing if you said, oh my God, I went to Hawaii and I loved Hawaii. I'm like, oh my God, I've been to Hawaii. I love Hawaii too. All of a sudden we have something in common that we didn't know before, right? Or Teresa Fry, like, oh, I got a puppy. Oh my God, I have dogs. I love puppies. And all of a sudden you start bonding on this different level. that's what happens across people, and it's done intentionally instead of inadvertently or happenstance. Is it happenstance? Yeah, just by accident. Just
No,
by accident.
but what
Serendipity.
serendipity. And
Yeah.
what's important about that question, I think, and I've said this before when you and I've been talking on the podcast before, it's not about inviting people to your wedding
Yeah.
or over for the holidays. But what's key about that question is he connected it to work. So there's still a little bit of a personal aspect, but he made it about work. So that's how you kind of start to set the tone about maybe being able to open up more is I'm still
Mhm.
making this about work. So I'm not asking you about what a significant life event was that you had. It's what affected work. What was the
Yeah.
significant event that
Yeah.
affected work? So I think that is what's really key about that question that I really appreciate.
Yeah. It's interesting because there are non-work things, right? But to your point, depending on where your team is and what's going on, but it's the thing that stood out for me. It's the be intentional around doing that. There was an activity that Rocco and I did with a leadership team, and it was during strategy. And I love this one, is we paired up people and each person interviewed the other person just about, where they grew up, what was going on, things about whatever. So you spent, I think it was maybe 20 minutes total. So each person had maybe 7 minutes, maybe it was 40, 30 minutes total. But what you did was you interviewed and then you drew a picture about the person based on the interview. Now, before you look and go, I'm not an artist. I'm not an artist. I do stick figures and they're not great stick figures. Okay. But I do stick figures. But what's cool is I was paired up with one of the leaders just because the numbers. Um, you learn something, you get some insights about somebody. They do the same thing. They turn around, interview you, they draw their picture, they ask questions. So you get some insight about what kind of family they grew up in. Are they married now? Do they have kids, animals, whatever that is? Do they have a house? Do they live in an apartment? Whatever that may be. And then when everyone's done doing that, then you're putting the pictures up on this board. And then if I interviewed you, I'm going to go up and introduce you to the room based on what I learned with the picture that I drew about it. And it's just another level. So when people are looking for icebreakers or things to deepen the connection around the team, these are things that work really well.
I absolutely love that.
Yeah.
I love the idea of somebody else describing you too. It also gives you a moment to pause because then you are hearing what that person heard you say.
Yeah.
And sometimes it also gives you that pause of this is what I'm saying that maybe I don't realize what I'm saying,
Yeah.
how people feel about me. I absolutely love that. One of the things that we also did, which I think helps break the ice a little bit without being too intrusive, is we did a wall of baby pictures and
Oh,
they were all numbered and you received a sheet where all the numbers were on there and you tried to guess who the baby was. Now if you're the only female or the only male, obviously that's harder to
yeah.
do,
Yeah.
but it
Yeah.
was really fun for people to see you as a baby and then to start to have those conversations about your childhood.
Yeah. Well, and you're all of a sudden taking, so maybe you've got somebody who's just been very not approachable, very standoffish, that sort of thing. And then you got them as a baby. It's like, okay, babies are approachable. So all of a sudden you're starting to see a different depth to who they are. Yeah, I love
Yeah,
that.
I do too.
Um, this is a cool topic. I encourage people to read, listen to whatever read means for you, Keith's book. I had ordered it and gave it as a gift to business owners that I had been, because I was a coach for small business administration. So they went through a 6-month learning cohort because I had the privilege of experiencing Keith Ferrazzi during a Tony Robbins event. So it is his playbook of how he engages with teams. He has a 6-month program that he does with other teams. So I want to be able to incorporate some of that stuff in the leadership development that I do with other teams as well. But if you're also doing that or it's your own team, check it out. Never lead alone. Yeah, Keith Ross.
Never leave alone. And he
Yeah,
does a podcast, so we know everybody here
yeah,
likes podcasts.
yeah,
So if you want to watch him on a
yeah.
podcast,
That'd be cool. I have to check that out because I did not check that out. But you're the podcast woman. I mean, that's where you got the
I
cues
do.
from too.
I do. Love a
Yeah.
good podcast.
Uh, yeah. So, what do you want people to walk away with on this topic, Kristi?
I think the one of the, and we've said it a million times, but in all of this, the common thread is curiosity. And I can't say it enough that being curious is so important. And this is, if you're curious about others, people will be curious about you.
Mm,
If you're vulnerable when somebody is, when you're having that conversation about that curiosity, and then to your point, what you said before, I have a puppy too. I can't tell you enough how important it is just to be curious.
yeah. No, I agree. I think the other thing is because there's going to be leaders that can't even imagine where to start, right? Or what that looks like. And maybe telling themselves a story. Yeah, that's great for somebody else, but that's never going to work with my team. Um, I would encourage you to challenge your assumptions, because you don't know what you don't know. And yeah, while maybe in current state today, people don't feel safe or it's not the expectation or whatever, but people have surprised me again and again and again. When that connection gets made, you watch the shift in their energy. There was a video around smiling that was done, and these two guys went out. They were tasked with from this psychologist to go out and ask people, "What made you smile today?" And my favorite image of that was this older guy sitting behind the counter, like in a 7-Eleven kind of quick stop kind of mini mart thing. And he was very not approachable. You could see he was just very stoic in the face until the question was asked, "What made you smile today?" And this huge smile spread across his face. And all of a sudden, people are approachable. So, even if you're looking around and their resting face is that, resting face, not
Mhm.
approachable, stay away, there's a smile in there.
Mhm.
So I encourage you to challenge your thinking and see where that smile is.
See where the smile is. And if you feel like you have to be the perfect leader, and again, to your point, if you're telling yourself that story, show up late to a meeting.
Mm,
Where if people you're always the first person there and you're standing behind the desk and waiting for everybody else, be the last person or show up a little late. Um,
hmm.
that will invoke a conversation.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. I always
Thank
enjoy
you.
being in the room with you. So until next time, this has been Leadership Soundbites with Kristi and Michelle. Please like, share, subscribe, and send me a topic. I mean, we find them from reading and what's going on, but what matters to you? So until next time, thank you.